Get some!
Welcome to the Young Turks. Cenk, Uygur and Kasparian with you guys. Obviously, huge news as always about Trump, Biden, Israel. You know it. But as we started, Jody Lynn already upgraded her membership, and because she knows what kind of a ridiculously good show we're about to have. So thank you for doing that, Jody. You could do that through the join button as well. Interesting. Casper, what do we have?
Why don't we talk a little bit about the cowardice of our president, Joe Biden? Let's start with that.
The hospital in Gaza killing was asked.
Have you expressed any specific concerns to Israel on that, sir?
Well, you know I have not been reluctant in expressing my concerns what's going on. And it's my hope and expectation that there will be less intrusive action relative to the hospital. We're in contact and we're with the Israelis. The hospital must be protected.
The hospital must be protected, referring to hospitals in the Gaza Strip that have faced aerial bombardments by the IDF at the direction, of course, of the Israeli government. Interesting how the person filming that whole interaction somehow decided it was a good idea to switch over to a shot of the reporter instead of the shot of our pathetic looking president. But it's not just pathetic looking. Biden can also be pathetic in how he literally tried to backtrack or backpedal a very mild statement about how hospitals should be protected in the Gaza Strip. So after that, he had John Kirby come out and say, well, what Biden really meant. So let's give you all of that. So Biden added that there is an effort to take this pause to deal with the release of prisoners, and that's being negotiated as well. And the Qataris are engaged, so I remain somewhat hopeful, but the hospitals must be protected. That was the entirety of the statement. Later, though, it was immediately walked back by John Kirby, the National Security Council's coordinator for strategic communications. Biden was referring to this extra burden that faces the IDF as they go into Gaza, because Hamas does shelter themselves behind civilian infrastructure, said John Kirby. This includes places like hospitals, schools, or tunnels under residential buildings, he said. It makes it much harder for any military force to go after those targets because the hospital itself ought to be, as the president said, ought to be protected. So he's really talking about this incredibly difficult conundrum that Israeli military forces are facing right now. It doesn't really seem like the IDF finds it to be a difficult conundrum at all. They just bomb the hospital. They've done it over and over again, and they will continue to do it over and over again with the cover provided by the United States government. Cenk, any thoughts?
Yeah, a lot of thoughts. So we shared with you guys yesterday that the IDF soldiers were shooting people coming out of the hospital. How do they know if they're civilians or Hamas? They don't. And then reports were that civilian bodies were piling up in front of the hospital. And so, and the main problem with the hospital, by the way, in this case, is cutting off the water and power. So as we told you yesterday, 3 babies have already died because they were taken off because the incubator ran out of power. Over 30 people have already died at the hospital for similar reasons. So how do you do it? Well, they always say like, oh, Hamas is using human shields, so there's nothing we can do. No, the first part of this sentence is interesting and debatable. The second part of the sentence is not debatable. Of course, there's something else you can do. So one way is much more dangerous for the IDF soldiers, I get it, but you can go inside the tunnels where Hamas is. And I know that it's very difficult and I'm sure it's booby trapped, etc. But if you gave me 2 options, show courage, go inside the tunnels, try to get the bad guys and rescue the hostages, or bomb on top of the tunnels, do absolutely no good and kill civilians, I think that's a super easy answer. The IDF, of course, has gotten to the opposite conclusion. No, shoot, bomb, cut off the electricity, etc. to the hospital and don't go in the tunnels and then shoot whoever comes out. Okay, and they're not always shooting everybody who comes out, right? But they've shot a lot of people who've come out. And so-
Can I give you an example of what Human Rights Watch reported today in regard to people they shoot at and kill? So Kenneth Roth from Human Rights Watch had tweeted the following. The Israeli army said it had targeted a suspicious vehicle containing several terrorists. The only people in the car were 3 girls, ages 14, 12, and 10, their grandmother and their mother. All were killed, except for their mother.
Yeah, so look, anyone who takes the IDF seriously is hilarious. I mean, quoting them as if it's their, like a news organization, no, they're work for government. They're the military arm of that government. They're the one committing war crimes right now. They have the worst track record of almost any military in the world in terms of being honest. I'm not saying in terms of killing civilians. The Russians have killed tons of civilians, although I'm not sure they've killed as many as Israel. We'll have to look that up. And so there are a lot of terrible governments in the world. I'm not saying Israel's the worst of them by a long shot. North Korea is awful. Uyghurs have, the Chinese have the Uyghurs in concentration camps, etc. But in terms of lying, the IDF is right up at the top. I mean, those 5 innocent women were all terrorists. They're a joke. They're a sick, sick joke in terms of the overwhelming propaganda they put out. But I want to go back to Biden for 1 second. So there's 3 problems there, the good, the bad, and the ugly, or 3 things. One is, does Biden still have a grasp of the issues? And I'm kind of relieved that he does. So he talks about it in a way that at least gives you a sense that he understands the issues at hand. Like when Trump talks about it, it's like, them bad, them here, we attack. Like you're like, okay, so he doesn't understand anything, just a buffoon. Why don't you just squirt water out of the flower in your lapel? Just total bozo the clown. So at least Biden understands the issues, that's the good. The bad is the substance of the issues. When he says, hey, we're basically still a green light. They're trying to negotiate the release of the hostages. America's pushing in the right direction. But when it comes to the hospital, he says maybe we should back off, but then his government doesn't really believe it. So then they have to go out and correct them and say, no, we're not gonna tell Israel to back off. We're gonna tell them to keep hitting the hospital. So the substance is awful.
So is he the president of the United States? Is he the leader of the free world? Is he or not? Or is John Kirby the leader of the free world? Well, I wanna know, because I have to say, that cold open we started this segment with appears to show you an incredibly weak person who is supposed to be leading this country. Okay, so a lot of it, yes, has to do with his age, but he's being asked about the brutality that's being directed toward innocent people, patients at a hospital. Many of those patients happen to be children. We showed you videos of infants taken off of incubators because they don't have the fuel to continue running those incubators. Who knows what the fate of those infants will be, they're premature infants. He doesn't even have the strength or the courage to look that reporter in the eye. He's looking down at his papers. He's talking as slowly as humanly possible. No credit. Wow, he said the most mild, common sense thing in the world, which is hospitals should be protected.
And then he had to walk it back.
And then someone in his administration immediately walks it back.
Yeah.
Because is he in charge? I don't know. Did he really mean it, Cenk?
So that goes to the third thing. And so this is both optics and substance. So when he mumbles and looks down, it looks awfully weak. You're like, Jesus Christ, what? You have to like lean in to hear what he's saying, but it's not just the optics, guys. So there's 2 possibilities on why he said the thing about the hospital and then it was walked back. One is that sometimes as you're speaking off the cuff, you overstate something. You mean to say something positive, but you get into a policy conundrum, as Kirby would say, because you mean to give a green light to the continued massacres, but you were accidentally human for a second and it slipped out. So that's possible. The other possibility is he's a little tiny bit confused about his own administration's policies. Then they get together in a room, they hash it out, and they decide, no, guys, we decided green light on the massacres. So then they send Kirby back out to correct the president because he got a little too human for a second. Right? Now there's a huge rebellion that Anna's gonna tell you about at the State Department and all throughout the executive branch because the fact that they have to walk back any half a sentence that he's human on is not a good sign. That's the most important underlying problem.
But before we get to that, I think it's really important to understand why people who find the actions of the IDF deplorable are saying what they're saying. Why people like me will come on this show, and despite as hard as I try to be calm and make cogent arguments without getting too emotional or too passionate, it is incredibly difficult for someone who actually gives a damn about human lives and innocent people to watch what you're about to watch and just feel passionateless, feel no passion while sharing these stories with you and talking about how our government, with our resources, continues to support the brutality and the barbarism that you're about to see. Let's take a look.
You wonder how anyone is left alive in Gaza City. Doctors in Al-Shifa Hospital are fighting to save the lives of 36 premature babies taken out of incubators that are no longer running due to a lack of fuel. 3 others died over the weekend. Children crying out in pain. Children trying to care for their mother. There are moments of relief too, even if they're tempered by suffering. Iman is meeting her daughter for the first time since the war began, after fleeing from the north. What was it like, she's asked. It's death, she replies. Slow death. Death is everywhere right now in Gaza. One by one, the body bags are brought out. 8 members of an extended family. What words of comfort can soothe this pain?
Those are bombs supplied by us, the United States of America, in a country that has an entire political party that claims that they will do anything to protect human life, even regulate the bodies of women within our borders. But their actions really do speak louder than words when you see what they are willing to protect and provide cover for in regard to the Israeli government and their military, the Israeli Defense Forces. I see those Palestinian civilians exactly the same as I see Israeli civilians. People who should live safe lives, lives of dignity, who should be protected, who should never be targeted by any political group, any terrorist group. But it really does pain me to see every single day over and over again how much certain people in this country have no problem dehumanizing the very people who are getting slaughtered in the Gaza Strip every single day. And I'm supposed to sit here and without any passion share these details with you. It's incredibly difficult because this particular issue is so shameful, it makes me feel ashamed of our government and what it is carrying out right now.
Yeah, so we all want the hostages home, right? I'm gonna do a similar plea as Anna here and trying to see people as human beings. So those hostages are human beings, and every time I think about them in a tunnel somewhere, a mom, there's some kids, anyone, I feel heartbroken over it, and we got to try to get them home as soon as possible, and Hamas should obviously release them, right? So, and they're working on negotiations right now. But when you see the Palestinians that are killed, they're also human. And so when now American media is treating it 50-50, which is amazing. My whole life, they've never been treated as human. And anytime Palestinians are killed or Muslims are killed, America just says, they're all terrorists anyway. It's deeply racist, and it's happened thousands of times in my lifetime. Again, getting better now. But guys, also about the prisoners. So when they're trying to release the hostages, they're negotiating over prisoners that Israel has that no one talks about. So Israel takes some prisoners based on evidence that they have. Oh, that guy's part of Hamas. This is before the October 7th attack, right? As they do normal security, and they have some evidence, and they tried those folks, etc. And then they take a whole bunch of prisoners that they have no evidence on.
And there's no charges against them.
There's no charges, there's no nothing. It's extrajudicial, it's totally illegal. And by the way, that also includes women and children. So Israel has taken hostages for decades. They continually take Palestinian hostages, but since it's a government doing it and it's an ally doing it, that doesn't count as hostages. Well, I'm sorry, but they are hostages. They're the children and the women that you took without any charges at all. So what? And basically now Hamas is saying, all right, let's do a hostage exchange. Your hostages for my hostages. And so anyone who says that's not fair is being ridiculous. What? So it's the Israeli hostages matter, and they definitely do, but the Palestinian hostages don't matter? Why? Because all Palestinians are terrorists, right? I mean, look, I just understand the underlying racism of constantly treating the Palestinians as if they're not human. And then the last set of prisoners that Israel is holding is, I don't know, all of the Palestinians, the millions and millions of Palestinians that they occupy in open air prisons. So when are we gonna let those prisoners go? So look, this isn't just about Israel, this is about America. America keeps sending money, and now we're gonna spend another $14 billion to keep millions of Palestinians as the prisoners of the Israelis. It is unconscionable, it is immoral, and anytime Israel is aggrieved, in this case rightfully, sometimes not rightfully, they go in and kill anyone they like. And so don't tell me they're targeting anyone when they've got over 11,000 civilians dead and they're too scared to go in the tunnels. I get why, but be honest about it. You're too scared to actually fight Hamas in the tunnels, so you're killing civilians above the tunnels instead. Be honest about what you're doing. Don't give me this crap about, I meant to kill 2 Hamas guys, I accidentally killed 11,000 civilians. So when you've killed 10 times as many civilians as Hamas, sorry, but I don't want to send you any more money for killing more civilians. The American taxpayer has no business basically financing massacres.
But we have no choice. Both political parties support what's happening. Both political parties will provide cover for what's happening. Both political parties, with zero debate, will funnel more and more billions and billions of dollars to the Israeli government, regardless of what it does. That is the reality of our political climate, our political situation, and our so-called allyship with the Israeli government, which doesn't really respect the lives of Palestinian civilians at all, and has the United States basically helping them in carrying out their brutality toward those Palestinians, while potentially expanding this war into a broader regional war with other countries, including Lebanon, Iran, Syria, Iraq. It's gonna be a disaster if that happens. And I hope it doesn't devolve into that situation, but that is the area that we're headed in as we speak. I want to move on though to a different element of this story that I think is relevant. It has to do with the pressure that Biden faces from people like Alan Dershowitz. So, President Joe Biden recently walked back a very mild statement about how hospitals in Gaza should be protected. After he made that mild statement, John Kirby came out and said, well, what he was referring to was the very difficult situation these poor IDF soldiers are in because Hamas operates in those tunnels. They use the human shields, and what could they do? They have no choice. They gotta bomb the hospitals, right? I mean, yes, high civilian death toll, but we love Israel. We're gonna support them no matter what. I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what Kirby did to walk back Biden's statements. Now, with that context in mind, we should be aware of the types of pressures that motivate some of the decisions made by the Biden administration. You look at Biden, he looks old, he looks weak, he looks like he's unwilling to take a stand against the brutality that Palestinian civilians are facing. And it doesn't really take much to bully him, apparently, because take a look at someone I wouldn't let bully me. I mean, this is a guy who's on the record defending pedophilia. You got Alan Dershowitz saying this. Let's take a look.
They're hoping that Israel kills babies so that Hamas can show the babies on CNN, and they call it the CNN strategy. This is mass murder by Hamas of Palestinian babies deliberately in order to get the world to turn against Israel. And unfortunately, President Biden is playing into their hands by telling Israel not to attack the hospital. He ought to be telling Hamas not to put their fighters, their rockets, their tunnels underneath hospitals, and denying these babies the opportunity to live.
The IDF makes the decision to fire at people in the hospitals and to bomb the hospitals. Hamas does not bomb the hospitals. Israel bombs the hospitals. The mass murder of those children is at the hands of the IDF. Blaming it on Hamas is laughable to say the least. They get to make the decision about whether or not they bomb the hospitals. They get to make a decision about what kind of military operation they carry out. I get it. I get that the IDF soldiers, in the eyes of many Americans, and certainly in the eyes of the Israeli government, are precious human beings that must be protected and must be kept safe, even though they're in combat. But there are other options, including special operations, actually targeting the Hamas militants in the tunnels, but that's risky. That would be difficult. They might risk their lives to do that. So they'll go for the, I guess, easy option of just bombing the hospitals, which really ends up killing far more innocent civilians and patients within the hospitals, as opposed to the militants that they're allegedly targeting. By the way, I'm gonna say it again, leadership of Hamas is in Qatar. So they can bomb as many hospitals as they want, but if they think this is the way that they're gonna root out Hamas, they're sadly mistaken.
Yeah, so Alan Dershowitz is a really interesting guy. So he spent his whole life trying to get famous for defending despicable people like O.J. Simpson, Klaus von Bülow, I believe.
Pedophiles.
And pedophile Jeffrey Epstein, who there's documentation that he cohorted with. And so I don't know exactly what they did with the kids. That's not for me to decide. And he's a notorious liar. And so who knows if he's telling the truth about what he did with Epstein, et cetera. But he's now turning his grotesque attention to killing Palestinians. So, I mean, understand what that segment is and why I'm talking in harsh ways that I am here. He's saying Biden's making a mistake by telling the Israelis to not kill as many people in the hospital. He's saying green light, kill as many people as you can in the hospital. Just blame it on Hamas later. He's saying kill them and then do better propaganda and pretend you didn't kill them, that they killed themselves or that Hamas killed them. So all you have to do, this is the Dershowitz way, just lie better, lie more, lie at greater quantity. Do terrible things, awful things, and then lie about it and cover your tracks. By the way, no one made him represent O.J. Simpson. He was not a public defender. He went rushing towards that trial. Oh, you cut 2 people's heads off. I'm here for you. Oh, I'm gonna get famous. I'm gonna get rich. And then I'm gonna go on TV and advocate for more murder. My name is Alan Dershowitz.
At least he's consistent.
That's right. He always defends murderers. That's Alan Dershowitz. That's his entire career. He's best known for defending grotesque murderers. So this is not at all surprising. He's saying hit the hospital, and then we'll just blame Hamas. Okay, wait. If it's Hamas's plan that Israel kills babies, and he said that, he said, they're getting Israel to kill the babies. How about you you advocate for Israel not falling into that trap and say, hey, Israel, don't fall into Hamas's trap. Don't kill the babies.
I know, but killing the babies is so tempting, Cenk.
Especially because you can just do propaganda right afterwards and say, even though I shot the baby in the head or I unplugged the power and the baby died because he wasn't an incubator anymore, you can say, I didn't do it, even though I just saw you do it. I just saw you do it. Yeah, I know, but don't believe your lying eyes. I'm a master liar, Alan Dershowitz. And I'm gonna lie my way into saying, even though I did it and you saw me do it, it wasn't me.
Well, speaking of propaganda, Cenk, I think it's relevant to kind of dive into that briefly because, I noticed a significant difference in how CNN in particular had been covering the war in Gaza. I was shocked to see that Jake Tapper, of all people, seemed to be covering it fairly. He, of course, was very vocal in condemning what Hamas did, and I think that's the right thing to do. I totally agree with him on that. But once he saw the response by the IDF, once he saw the high civilian death toll in the Gaza Strip, he would ask tough questions of the very politicians who were providing cover for that. And I gave him a lot of credit for that. But then all of a sudden things changed. And I was curious, what happened? Now, Tapper took a trip to Israel. A lot of CNN reporters, as we speak, are literally embedded with the IDF. When you're embedded with the IDF controls what the narrative is. Let's keep it real. And we also know that Israel had a huge problem. They claimed that there were reporters from the New York Times, from CNN, who were allegedly embedded with Hamas. And so they were vicious toward those reporters, but no problems when it comes to reporters being embedded with the other side, right? Okay, I give you that context because Semaphore had an interesting piece written several days ago that you should be aware of, because this might be one of the other motivating factors behind the change in CNN's coverage on this topic. They report that real estate billionaire Barry Sternlicht launched a campaign in the days after October 7th, the October 7th attacks in Israel, and in an email viewed by Semaphore, sought $1 million donations, each from dozens of business world's wealthiest people, okay? He wrote that he'd had a great conversation about the effort with CNN owner David Zaslav, and that Endeavor CEO and talent agent Ari Emanuel had agreed to coordinate the campaign, though people or spokespeople for both men said they aren't involved now. Now, pay close attention to this quote, because this is the important part here. This is the meat of the story. Public opinion will surely shift as scenes, real or fabricated by Hamas, of civilian Palestinian suffering will surely erode Israel's current empathy in the world community, he wrote. We must get ahead of that narrative. So we're talking about an effort to fundraise like $50 billion in order to, honestly, I see this as a way of messing with people so they don't know what the actual truth is, right? If you have that much money funding a media campaign to dominate the narrative of what's happening, well, then it's kind of difficult to parse out what the reality is or what the truth is. And you also, at the same time, have efforts to undermine any reporters who are on the ground in Gaza. There aren't many. In fact, dozens of them have been slaughtered as a result of this war. And so the whole point is, let's dominate that narrative and let's make it seem as though everything that the IDF is doing in Gaza is above board. They're not committing any war crimes. How could you accuse them of doing that? I mean, yes, they're bombing hospitals, they're bombing mosques, they're bombing refugee camps, they're even bombing, Orthodox churches in the Gaza Strip. They're even bombing the south where people are supposed to be fleeing to for safety. But that's okay, let's just pretend like that's fine and they're justified in doing what they're doing, even given that high civilian death toll.
Yeah, so there's a fine line between advocacy and propaganda. So I think that most ethnic groups would rally behind their original home country or the country that they have affinity for through either racial, religious, or ethnic ties. And so I always use my own example, would Turks that I know that I grew up with, Turkish Americans, rally to Turkey's cause? Yeah, they probably would, right? And then you could say, hey, they're advocating, or you could say, hey, if they're gonna raise $50 million and they're gonna say, oh, the Turkish government didn't do anything wrong, maybe it slips into propaganda, right? And so it's interesting. But look at all the nuances here. Because I don't want anybody going in the wrong direction here, and this is really important, guys. So first of all, that group is not all Jewish; they're all Americans. Some are not Jewish, some are. Okay, but what's really important is what Ben Smith pointed out at the end of the article. It didn't really work too well. So despite the fact of having these massive media figures, they do not control the media, and a lot of the media, including the media that Zaslav operates, came out and said things that were very true and didn't listen to this advocacy or propaganda, right? And credit to Jake Tapper, Wolf Blitzer, who in the past have had a very establishment point of view, but here have done a really good job at times in pointing out and challenging the government officials of Israel. Andrea Mitchell, a really good job recently on MSNBC. So I don't want anybody to fall into those old tropes, the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, etc. In fact, I think this proves that those theories are not correct. He couldn't get everybody to sign on. It didn't work overall, and they were doing advocacy that I think a lot of other ethnic groups would have tried as well. So I want to give that context. Because guys, we don't want to be like the bad guys. So you don't want to be like Alan Dershowitz and make assumptions based on race, religion, etc. You don't want to be a racist like him. He assumes, oh, Palestinians, who cares? Palestinians are savages and Muslims are savages. We have to occupy them for decade after decade after decade. We should never give them freedom. It's a deeply racist position by definition. Why are the Palestinians the only people not capable of governing themselves? They say, oh no, they would always do violence. Okay, thank you for admitting that you're a racist. Now, we should never do likewise. We have Jewish brothers and sisters that live here, that work here, that are in our community, that are in our family, that are your brothers and sisters. We stick together, we're all Americans, okay? And by the way, a lot of the Jewish Americans are the ones that are leading most aggressively to protect the Palestinian people in Gaza. And even in this group, Ari Emanuel, we don't agree with him on a lot of these issues based on what I've seen in public reporting, but he also called for Netanyahu to be fired because there is no universal Jewish voice. There's different people with different backgrounds, etc., and different points of view. But be careful what you see because there are efforts to do advocacy and sometimes propaganda by a lot of different sides. So what you'll see in American media is, oh, don't listen to anything that's coming out of Gaza. That's all Hamas propaganda. But then Israel will say that they killed a bunch of terrorists, and then you look inside the car, as Anna pointed out earlier in the show, 2 women, 3 girls, 14, 12, and 10, not remotely terrorists. So the IDF lies, Hamas lies. Our job is to sort it out and to give you the truth. What Hamas did was terrible. And now, unfortunately, Israel has killed about 10 times as many civilians. And your bar for what our ally does should be a lot higher, not lower than Hamas.
Your bar for the country saying that they represent a civilized society that's fighting against barbarism, bar should be higher for them, right? The argument that Israel's government should be compared to a terrorist group, Hamas, is ridiculous. Hamas is a terrorist group. Israel is supposed to represent the only democratic system within that region. They should act like it. We got to take a break. We'll be right back with more news, including a bit of a tiff between Ben Shapiro and Candace Owens on this issue. I side with someone on this conflict. I would never expect this to ever happen, but it's gonna happen. So when we come back from the break, I'll tell you who.
All right, back on TYT, Cenk, Anna, Mark Gage, Jenna Wickler, and Danielle Garofalo. Thank you so much. And Danielle, thanks for signing up at Premium. Keeps prices low for everyone else. And Benjamin Morrill looked out for the community again and gifted 5 Young Tourist memberships on YouTube. You guys are all amazing. We appreciate you. Anna.
There's a big rift developing over at the Daily Wire that's worth discussing. So let's get right to it.
And then the question was about Candace Owens. I think her behavior during this has been disgraceful. Without a doubt. I can't close that. Yeah, I mean, she still works for my company. I think she's been absolutely disgraceful. I think that her faux sophistication on these particular issues has been ridiculous. It's not faux sophistication, it's ridiculous. Everybody can see the moves that she's making and the things that she's saying, and I find them disreputable.
There you have Ben Shapiro calling his Daily Wire colleague Candace Owens disgraceful over her comments and coverage of the ongoing war in the Gaza Strip, which has in fact disproportionately killed thousands of civilians, including children. Now, showing concern for innocent civilians dying is apparently a big no-no for Ben Shapiro, who until now has kind of shied away from being overly critical of Candace Owens or any of his colleagues publicly. Just keep in mind the types of things that Matt Walsh has said on his show. But with that said, let's dive in a little bit, see what Candace Owens has said about this issue on the record, and maybe we can figure out what it is exactly that Ben Shapiro finds so disgraceful. Now, this tweet from November 3rd certainly caught my attention, mostly because I agree with it, and I was shocked that she tweeted anything that I would agree with. But here's what she said. No government anywhere has a right to commit a genocide, ever. There is no justification for a genocide. I can't believe this even needs to be said or is even considered the least bit controversial to state. Now, there are other things that I'm gonna share with you in regard to her coverage and her commentary, including what she tweeted out soon after that video of Ben Shapiro was released. But before we get to all of that, Cenk, what are your thoughts about Candace Owens' tweet?
No, the tweet is 100% fine.
Yeah.
And so that's not the issue. Look, I'm conflicted about the right wing that is now saying that Israel's wrong. And partly because, hey, look, if we have bipartisan agreement that we should not be funding the atrocities that's happening in Gaza, and we should treat Palestinians as human beings and value them, that's fantastic. And I've been waiting for that breakthrough to happen for a long, long time. On the other hand, there are some in the right wing that are doing it, might be doing it for the wrong reasons. And so Candace did support Kanye West after he said awful comments about Jewish people, Hitler, etc. And so that gives me very significant pause. And then Tucker Carlson has also said things that may give me pause about his views of Jewish Americans, etc. And so that's why this is a tough issue where it feels to me, some of the leaders at least are accidentally right, maybe for the wrong reasons, and I'm worried about supporting that. At the same time, it's interesting the tack that Shapiro is taking, because so we have people here that disagree, hosts that disagree, and we just air it out. And we don't say they're despicable, we just have conversations and make sure both sides are represented. So he's taking a different tack, and that's interesting as well.
Yeah, I think it would be more helpful to engage in that conversation rather than, talk about each other behind each other's backs, or I mean publicly, but not directly to one another. But with that said, I totally hear what you're saying, Cenk, because I do, of course, take into account some of the statements that Candace Owens has made in the past. I remember her being part of a congressional hearing where she said some incredibly creepy things that seem to provide cover and defend, Hitler. So you should know that context, but you should also know this context. None of us really know who Candace Owens really is, because if you dig deeper into her history, she used to run a blog that was highly critical of Donald Trump. She had a left-wing perspective on political issues, and then suddenly, without notice, she switched on pretty much everything. So I don't know what's actually in her heart or mind. What I do know is, taken in a vacuum, I think that tweet is totally fine. But of course, you should never look at anything as if it's in a vacuum, right? So you should take that context into consideration. Now, with that said, there was a conversation that she had with a Jewish comedian by the name of Ami Kozak on her show. And there were a few interesting things that came up in the context of that conversation. So I want to show you what I'm talking about. Let's take a look.
People are feeling like they can't even speak about this subject, or they can't talk to a person like the way that you and I are speaking without being called a Jew hater. And so it's kind of creating this weird situation where actually it's furthering the problem to keep calling people Jew haters. It's furthering the problem to call people anti-Semitic. It would be more helpful to actually try to see where you connect and see how you're feeling, because it humanizes things. It's like, listen, I'm not Jewish, so I don't feel as radically or as motivated as you do about this situation that's happening. I am being selfish and American and saying I don't want a single dollar to go overseas because we've been in a bunch of useless wars, and that might be upsetting to hear. But there's no anti-Semitism in my heart when I say it. It's just me being consistent in how I've always felt.
So she's coming at it from an America first, we need to take care of our own country before we provide military funding for other countries. To be fair, she has been consistent on that. She doesn't want to send any aid to Ukraine. Whether you agree with that or not is an entirely different story, but it's not like she's singling out Israel while saying, no, we gotta send a ton of funds to Ukraine. But before we go to you, Cenk, I wanna go to one other moment in that interview. It's short. And I just want you to pay close attention to her facial expression when he responds to her, because I can kind of tell that she didn't like what he had to say. Let's watch.
I genuinely would vote against sending a single dollar to Israel, like I was vocal about not sending money to Ukraine or any other country. It's nothing personal. It's just I am very much America first. I'm looking at what's happening in America right now. I've been talking about what's happening at the universities. There's a million ways I would spend that money, and first and foremost, it would be to defend our own borders. And I don't say that to
Right. I can understand that as a policy matter, as a foreign aid, how one believes about foreign aid, the libertarian isolationist position. I fully understand it. There were people who were fully pro-Israel in the world way back when, who used to also say no foreign aid because it entangles us with America in ways that we can't have our independence.
I just thought that was an interesting moment.
It's an interesting laser eyes there. Anyways, look, I think that her tweet in response to Ben Shapiro speaking out is a little bit more telling. Again, it could go in two directions. I'll give you both directions. But she wrote, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." Yada yada, Christian, No,
be fair. You should read it. Read the whole
all
thing.
right. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. So you can see that seems like a jab at Shapiro. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And then she also added Christ is king in the next tweet. Now, one way to interpret that is, hey, look at this wonderful religious person who's quoting Jesus and saying we should be decent and kind and loving to everyone. That's a very generous interpretation. But hey, again, she's not wrong that we shouldn't fund the financing of killing Palestinian civilians. The ungenerous version of looking at that is, here's a Bible quote against this Jewish guy, and he's slandering me here and saying evil things against me. And remember, Christ is king. And so and you can't serve both God and money, and presumably Shapiro's money there. Now it's technically true because she works for him, but it's also could be a reference to anti-Semitic tropes about controlling media, et cetera, which Kanye said and she backed initially. So you can see how it could go in both directions. But my guess is eventually there'll be a rift because Ben Shapiro does have a red line, and this is it, okay? And he tolerated the Kanye stuff barely. I thought he shouldn't have tolerated that. This is a policy disagreement.
Yeah, I agree, totally.
I think he's got his priorities mixed up there, but she's obviously getting very close to the red line, and she wants to make money on her own too. So if they split, she's gonna lean, my guess is she's gonna lean into the Christ is king kind of talk.
Right, look, final thing I'll say about this is in regard to her last tweet following his statement on that video that we showed you. I find passive aggressiveness to be the most cowardly thing on the planet. I like aggressive aggressiveness. So if you got something to say it, and say it to the person that you mean for it to be directed to. Don't be passive aggressive, and don't do this like middle-aged mom thing where you use social media to engage in your passive aggressiveness. Sorry, middle-aged moms, you guys know it's true. It happens all the time, we all see it, okay?
I didn't even know that.
Let's be better than that.
Okay.
You wanna say something, just say it, and say it directly to the person that you mean to say it to. That's all I'll say.
Look, we've had clashes here between the hosts.
Definitely,
yep. I'm surprised that they're not having a conversation about it. And remember, these are the guys who say cancel culture, don't do that, have freedom of speech. I mean, look, I don't know why I'm helping them with their business model, but if I was them, I'd get Ben Shapiro and Candace Owens in a room. I'd have that conversation. It would be interesting to a lot of people, and they would get a lot of viewers. I think that's the right way to hash it out, no matter who's in trouble, left wing, right wing, or whatever motivation they have for saying what they did. The best way to do this is to talk it out.
We'll find possible solutions to electile dysfunction when we come back. Don't miss it.
Bruh.
I am scary. I am threatening. I'm Darth Vader.
All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys. Katie Lash was an American hero. She upgraded membership through the join button, and that helps keep price at $4.99 for people that could only afford that. It's only $5 a month, but everybody's got different circumstances. So Katie, thanks so much for doing that. You could of course also become a member through the join button. So let's go to Anna next for the news.
All right. Well, we've got an update on the election interference trial involving Donald Trump and his 18 co-conspirators. So let's get to the latest details and updates.
He said the boss is not going to leave under any circumstances. We are just going to stay in power. And I said to him, well, it doesn't quite work that way, you realize. And he said, we don't care.
There has been a leak. You just watched a video of Jenna Ellis speaking to prosecutors in the Georgia election interference case. And apparently tapes of Georgia's investigators talking to not just Jenna Ellis, but Sidney Powell and Kenneth Chesebro and bail bondsman Scott Hall have been released to the press. Now they give us some insight into the plans to overturn or just flat out ignore the results of the 2020 presidential election. And the Fulton County District Attorney is furious about this leak, and we'll get to what Fani Willis thinks happened in regard to these tapes being released later in this segment. But before we do, it's important to get into what was seen in these tapes and what kind of testimony was given by the individuals featured in them. Now, the Fulton indictment accuses Trump and 18 co-defendants, including Rudy Giuliani and Mark Meadows, of a wide-ranging conspiracy to steal the 2020 presidential election or overturn the results of our democratic process. Jenna Ellis was among the defendants, and as we all know, she pleaded guilty to lesser charges, meaning she has turned on Trump. And those lesser charges are aiding and abetting false statements and writings in exchange for her testimony. Now, in her conversation with the prosecutors, the day before she took the plea deal, she described a conversation with Dan Scavino, Trump's deputy chief of staff at the time. And she told prosecutors that he was absolutely unfazed by her view, her alleged view, that Trump was running out of options to challenge Joe Biden's presidential victory. Let's take a look.
He had come up to me and introduced me to his family and had said, thank you for the work that you're doing for the president. And I said something to him like, I'm sorry that we haven't been able to do more. And I emphasized to him, I thought that the claims and the ability to challenge the election results was essentially over because of the dismissal of the Texas versus Pennsylvania case from the United States Supreme Court. And he said to me in a kind of excited tone, well, we don't care and we're not gonna leave. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, the boss, meaning President Trump, and everyone understood the boss, that's what we all called him. He said the boss is not going to leave under any circumstances. We are just going to stay in power. And I said to him, well, it doesn't quite work that way, you realize. And he said, we don't care.
So while she was publicly regurgitating the nonsense coming out of the Trump campaign, apparently privately, according to what she's saying to prosecutors, she was really pushing back. I don't know if I believe that, but she went, again, I want to reiterate what she said there. She took the we statement from Dan Scavino to mean Trump, Scavino, Mark Meadows, and his other closest advisors. Ellis also told prosecutors that in her mind, the fact that Scavino offered the information immediately after she brought up the Supreme Court loss indicated to me that he was serious, and that was in furtherance of something that he had discussed with the boss. Now, Steve Sato, who was Trump's lead counsel in the Fulton County case, or is, called the purported private conversation as described by Ellis absolutely meaningless. The only salient fact to this nonsense line of inquiry is that President Trump left the White House on January 20th, 2021 and returned to Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida. If this is the type of bogus, ridiculous evidence DA Willis intends to rely upon, it is one more reason that this political travesty of a case must be dismissed. Ellis also told prosecutors that she was asked to join a December 7th, 2020 conference call with Giuliani and two other Trump campaign officials as they talked legal strategy with several Republicans who were slated to serve as Trump's fake electors. Ellis said that she had not initially been privy to the fake elector plot and believed it had been shielded from me specifically, though she did not elaborate on why. Ellis said she became aware of the effort when she was added to a group text chain about the plan that included Giuliani, Boris Epstein, Mike Roman, and John Eastman. Former Trump lawyer Kenneth Chesebro disclosed in his recorded statement that at a previously unreported White House meeting, he briefed Trump on election challenges in Arizona and summarized a memo in which he offered advice on assembling alternate slates of electors in key battleground states to cast ballots for Trump despite Biden's victories in those states. Cenk, any thoughts about her testimony?
Yeah, I have thoughts about her and Chesebro and Trump's attorney. So Trump's attorney basically says, well, he left at some point, so that means he's not guilty. No, it doesn't mean that at all. He only left after his plot failed. So now let's break that down. Why did it fail? He had the plot to do the fake electors, and they were supposed to cause enough chaos so that the election wouldn't be certified, and then those fake electors would be counted by the Republican legislatures instead of the real electors, right? But it broke down on several fronts. Mike Pence refused to not certify the election. Eventually the election was certified, but also credit to Republican legislatures across the country who said, no, we're not going to certify these obviously fraudulent electors, okay? So when that plot failed, then Trump was out of options, although he did consider rolling out the tanks. And even Sidney Powell, after she flipped, said that they did discuss, and she thought they should have used the military to grab the voting machines. So they discussed every potential option for a coup. And when he ran out of options because the people around him wouldn't support him, then he finally left, but then kept going, no, I'm the real president and I need to be reinstated, and all sorts of other lunatic conspiracy theories. Now, that brings us back to Chesebro. So he did the fake elector scheme, but even in his testimony, he was like, but I'm not with John Eastman. John Eastman's the crazy one.
No, I mean, don't get me wrong, John Eastman, definitely crazy. But remember, in the indictment, co-conspirator 5 is Kenneth Chesebro. Kenneth Chesebro is the moron. He's a lawyer. He is a lawyer. He's the moron who had the documents where he specifically noted that the electors were fake and fraudulent electors. He's a lawyer.
Yeah, so, but thank you though for that accidental admission, which led to a lot of these dominoes falling.
Exactly.
That was a huge piece of evidence. So, but the reason I bring his disagreement with Eastman up, because basically Chesebro was saying, look, what Eastman was doing was a coup. And I'm not part of that. I just had the fake elector part. I only had a small part of the coup. Eastman had the whole grand idea for the coup where we actually overturned the results, even though we all know that Biden won. So again, none of this is ever gonna break through to MAGA. They're gonna be like, oh, everyone that they before were saying were amazing. Remember when Jenna Ellis and Sidney Powell were gonna release the Kraken, and they had all this secret evidence, and they had the mules, and they had everything, right? Back then, MAGA was like, yes, these are the most reputable, greatest lawyers in America. Now they're all like, they're all liars and turncoats and deep
They weren't my lawyers, which is what Trump's, I guess, line of defense is against Sidney Powell, who was one of the campaign lawyers who has now flipped on him. He didn't seem to despise her until she did flip, and then he claimed, that's not my lawyer. She was never my lawyer. She was never the campaign lawyer.
And they were all the most honest people in the world until they all became incredible liars, right?
Yeah.
So look, forget MAGA, but for independents out there, guys, how obvious is it? This guy's a fascist. He never wanted to leave. These are his top people who helped him organize the plot to do the coup, saying, oh yeah, the boss didn't want to leave, and he didn't care about the law. He didn't care about anything.
Yeah, so let's get to Sidney Powell. Again, the same Sidney Powell who Trump now claims was not in fact one of his lawyers, which, if you want to use attorney-client privilege as a form of defense or protection in this case, maybe don't go around saying she was never my lawyer, but okay, fine, you say never my lawyer, that's fine. She described a fight that she had with Rudy Giuliani and outright admitted that she knew nothing about election law. By the way, she passed the bar. She legitimately was a lawyer. But with that said, let's watch.
There was a big shouting match in which Rudy called me every name in the book, and I was the worst lawyer he'd ever seen in his life. There were no circumstances under which he'd work with me on anything. He called me a bitch and I don't know what all. And that's pretty much all I remember about that one. Did I know anything about election law? No, but I understand fraud from having been a prosecutor for 10 years.
Yeah, I don't support the bitch comment, but everything else seems like Giuliani was right about.
Well, but it applies double for him, of course.
Of course.
But that was a hilarious piece of testimony there. Did he call me a pumpkinhead? He did. Did he say that my farts smell? He did.
Oh my God.
It was like she went down this whole laundry list, right?
Yes.
And then, but my favorite part is watching all these goons squirm now that they're forced to tell the truth. Because they were all tough guys before when they were trying to steal the election. Because remember, if they had actually stolen the election, right now they'd be on the cabinet, they'd be huge, they'd be famous and powerful, and that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to lie and steal and cheat to get that power. And so they were up there, oh, I know election law, and I'm telling you that I'm positive that this election was stolen. Now she's like, election law, never heard of it. I don't know anything about election law. Okay, yeah, that's what I thought.
Now, she also disclosed some details about the plot to basically break into the voting machines. That's a big part of this case as well. So let's take a look at that.
What was President Trump's sense of what you would do as special counsel?
I guess he assumed, and I would have thought that I would have looked at putting into effect a provision of 13848 that would have allowed the machines to be secured in 4 or 5 states.
How did you choose which states that you would target?
How would I have chosen that? By the ones where there were the most statistical anomalies.
Statistical anomalies meaning votes for Biden as opposed to Donald Trump. I think that's what she's referring to there. Now, in discussing her direct conversations and meetings with Trump, Powell told prosecutors that she never heard Trump concede that he lost the election, even after being told by key aides that he had. Instead, she said he was following instincts that he won.
What is instinct? So look, now the Republicans have lost the thread so much. They're like, well, of course we don't have any evidence. I mean, but we have emotional truth. We don't have factual truth. But Donald Trump's fifis were that he had won the election, and he was so sad. Little Donnie was like, I want my toy back. I feel like my instincts say I won, but Daddy always gave me everything I wanted.
She even told prosecutors that she happened to be present when multiple advisors told Trump that he had in fact lost, and prosecutors pressed Powell over why the president followed her advice instead of the advice of the other advisors. And here's how she replied: because I didn't think he had lost. I saw an avenue pursuant to which, if I was right, he would remain president. So, of course, Trump is going to favor the advisor, the lawyer who's telling him what he wants to hear because he didn't want to accept the fact that he had lost the election. Now, finally, let's get to Fani Willis because she is not happy about these tapes leaking to the public. And she has made a filing to the judge in this case, Judge Scott McAfee, saying that the video recordings were not released by the state to any other party other than the defendants charged in the indictment. The release of these confidential video recordings is clearly intended to intimidate witnesses in this case, subjecting them to harassment and threats prior to trial, constitutes indirect communication about the facts of this case with confidants.
No, co-defendants.
I'm sorry, co-defendants, my bad. Co-defendants and witnesses, and obstructs the administration of justice in violation of the conditions of release imposed on each defendant. So, she's coming out strong. She's not very happy about this. And I think that there is some truth to the witnesses who are testifying in these videos being targets of harassment. We've already seen Trump just aggressively go after anyone who speaks out against him, anyone who's turned on him. He went from like loving Sidney Powell to suddenly she was never my lawyer, I never had anything to do with her. He's treated others similarly. So I hear what she's saying. I don't know without a shadow of a doubt how the tapes got leaked, but she does think that it's the defendants who had access to the tapes. Okay,
2 quick things. She wasn't my lawyer, except that he was gonna make her special counsel in charge of the entire election.
I picked the best people.
Come on, man. Okay, and secondly, I don't know who leaked the tapes because it's kind of interesting in why they leaked them, because they're actually very, very damning of Donald Trump and the rest of the defendants. So I don't know why the defendants would leak these really damaging tapes, but it's obvious that one of the defendants did it because it definitely wasn't the prosecutor. She's super pissed about it. But maybe that leaves me the option of what Fani Willis is saying. Maybe they leaked him to say, like, these are the bad guys. Is somebody going to do something about these bad guys?
We don't know.
We don't know. But Willis doesn't know to the point where she's deeply concerned. And she's saying, I'm not going to give these nest of vipers any more evidence. They have to come in and watch it. Of course, they can present their own defense, but we're not going to hand it to them because they just immediately use it for their own purposes and try to intimidate the witnesses. Yeah, that's who they are. Guys, there's fascists here in America. And by the way, currently leading the presidential race. That guy tried to destroy our democracy. This is among the overwhelming evidence against him. We cannot let him win again.
All right, that does it for our first hour, but God, do not miss the second hour. Brawls. Brawls have taken place in Congress. I'm not even kidding. Near brawls, actual physical violence. We've got that and more coming up. Don't miss it.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur, and I'll see you soon.